The information that I'm sharing with you today is a little bit about what's at stake. You remember the fragile glass thermometers that used to contain mercury. They'd break, the mercury gets into the environment, it gets into the fish eventually, and the estimate was that about 15 to 20% of women who may be pregnant were getting levels of mercury in the fish that they eat that could cause brain damage in the developing child. And that was well documented. Maine was a leader in systematically replacing mercury-containing products with mercury-free alternatives. You can't find those products on the shelf anymore. And now today, some 30 states have enacted comprehensive legislation. There's a few other examples here, the flame retardants, the ban on lead in childhood products. Why are the states doing this? It's because the federal chemical safety system is completely broken. The federal law is called the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA. It was passed in 1976, 37 years ago, and it grandfathered in, when it passed, 62,000 chemicals in commerce with no requirement to submit health and safety data, no restrictions on their use. 20,000 more chemicals have been introduced under this law federally. The US EPA is so handcuffed by this law, it's only restricted some uses of 5 chemicals in 37 years and has only required or ordered testing for the effects of some 200 of all these thousands of chemicals. Everyone recognizes that the federal law is badly broken. That's why the states are acting. It's especially important to note that every single of the dozens of Maine laws that have been enacted that are described here in the last decade, they're still being debated, has been opposed by the toxic chemical manufacturers lobby. They're called ACC. Euphemistically, it's the American Chemistry Council, but it's the manufacturers of toxic chemicals. They're opposed to state regulation. They're also opposed to European legislation. The European Union adopted comprehensive protective chemical policy in 2007. It's called REACH. That's a lot of what Maine has done and other states are based on elements of this European policy. It's the modern way to protectively regulate chemicals. You don't assume they're innocent until proven guilty. You assume that they have to be proven safe. That's the basic principle. Well, the chemical industry vigorously, even though it's the U.S. chemical industry, vigorously opposed the adoption of the European legislation in 2007. Their whole strategy is to take advantage of these trade agreements to eliminate the so-called non-tariff regulatory barriers. They're aiming to harmonize downward. They're aiming to undermine the European chemical policy and preempt the states like Maine from regulating chemicals so that they can continue to market dangerous chemicals even though safer alternatives are becoming available. And it greatly concerns me that all the hard work of the Maine legislature could be reversed if these types of agreements go forward.
The ACLU of Maine believes that the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, TPP, raises significant concerns about citizens' freedom of expression, due process, innovation, and the future of the Internet's global infrastructure. The ACLU does not believe that domestic intellectual property law can or should be changed through international agreements. While the administration insists that TPP will not change substantive U.S. law, signing the agreement would make it more difficult for Congress to update copyright laws while keeping in compliance with the new international obligations. We are very concerned that the President is circumnavigating constitutional checks and balances by wrongly asserting fast-track authority in order to negotiate the agreement without congressional oversight. The United States Trade Rep is negotiating TPP without meaningful public consultation, and negotiations have been placed on an artificial fast track. Shielding proposals and agreed-upon language from the public until after negotiations have concluded and the agreement is finalized is inconsistent with democratic principles. Thank you.
The Maine AFL-CIO is a federation over 160 local unions across the state, representing nearly 30,000 workers and retirees, from shipbuilders to nurses, from bus drivers to paper makers, and hundreds of other industries and workplaces. Our members, these Maine workers, are very disturbed by the negotiations happening on the TPP. First and foremost, the secrecy and lack of transparency is incredibly alarming. We know that NAFTA has failed us. It has resulted in immense job loss here in Maine and across the U.S. It has driven down wages, working conditions, and environmental standards across the board. And yet we have watched Congress pass dozens of free trade agreements modeled exactly after NAFTA. Panama, Colombia, South Korea, all of the CAFTA nations, the list goes on and on. We're not opposed to trade, but we are opposed to rigged deals that benefit multinational corporations while leaving the rest of us behind. That's exactly what the NAFTA model has done and will continue to do until we create a fundamentally different trade model that benefits workers and increases wages, that creates jobs, and that protects resources like our air and water. All we have is broken promises from past trade agreements. The American people were told that the South Korea Free Trade Agreement, one of the most recent ones, would be a job creator for the U.S., but it has not been. Our trade deficit with South Korea rose 30% in the first year since that trade deal was passed, meaning job loss, not job creation. Imports from South Korea are up and exports to that country are down. But numbers aside, I have had the privilege to sit and talk with people who have been personally impacted by free trade. With Gayleen and Wendell, who lost their jobs in Ashland when the sawmill shut down and moved just across the border into Canada. I'm here for Mike and for Debbie, who lost their jobs at the paper mill in Jay when the company shut it down, and meanwhile, as new paper mills are regularly coming online in China, where there are no worker safety protections and nobody's stopping the mills from dumping the chemicals into the river. I have sat with women my age and younger who came to speak with me about after leaving their shift at the maquila in Nicaragua, a place where they work incredibly long hours and do not earn a wage on which they can support their families. I've walked on the land of a corn farmer in El Salvador who has no way to provide for his family since CAFTA because cheap, subsidized corn is dumped onto their market from the U.S. and sells for less than he can even buy the seed and fertilizer to grow it. These rigged trade deals have created a global race to the bottom with disregard for workers' rights, food safety, or the environment. In addition to these problems, as you guys well know, we are now seeing more and more cases of governments and companies suing using trade rules to undermine local laws that are designed to protect our communities. This commission has been speaking out loudly against these investor state provisions for a decade. You must not let up your efforts to combat these anti-democratic provisions that usurp local control from our towns, states, and our nation. Congress should not approve another free trade agreement that includes these investor state provisions. Specifically, we know that the countries involved with the TPP have a problem with respecting labor. One of the fundamental rights of workers is the freedom of association, the right to form a union at the workplace should the workers choose. Vietnam is currently marketed as the low-cost labor alternative for corporations who feel that the Chinese sweatshop workers are overpaid. The U.S. State Department noted in 2010 that independent labor unions and even opposition political parties are illegal in Vietnam, with dissidents who've attempted to form both behind bars. Brunei is hardly any better. There's virtually no union activity in Brunei, nor any legal basis for collective bargaining or strikes. The most important thing right now is the process that we as a country will choose to use to decide our future trade policy. Trade Promotional Authority, commonly known as Fast Track, is an absolutely unfair and undemocratic method for the president to use to gain approval for future trade deals like the TPP. As you know, Fast Track would prevent debate and block any amendments from coming forward. It is a bad form of decision-making and unfair to the American people.
Is over the last 10, 15, 20 years, is the average American citizen better off for the international trade agreements? And does anyone in Congress have a clue as to what are in these trade agreements and what happens when they're implemented? Mm-hmm. I keep asking myself that, and I go door to door and I ask people, are you better off today than you were yesterday? And the answer I get is total despair, and the answer most definitely is no.
Our organization is a coalition of groups working for fair trade in Maine. Our members are labor organizations, community organizations, environmental groups, social groups, food and agricultural organizations, among others. There's already been some discussion here tonight about the secrecy of the current negotiations and relative to the comments of Senator Patrick a minute ago about whether our Congress people even know what's in the agreements. Recently, the ban on even them seeing it was lifted, and so Congress people and senators can read the text. However, they have to go into a room to read them. They cannot take any notes with them when they leave after looking at these documents, which are thousands of pages, and they may not discuss it with anyone, including their staff. And I think as those of you who are legislators here know how much you have to read and understand, and the value of being able to discuss some of these issues with people just to work your own mind through it. And that is not a privilege that's afforded them. And so they also can't talk to us about it any more than any of the other people who are cleared to see the texts. What we know about the agreements is only what's been leaked. But what we've heard concerns us deeply. In particular, we understand that the investor state provisions are likely to be still based on the NAFTA model, which is the model that allows companies to sue governments. We did see an article online that the commission unanimously backed a resolution urging the federal government to reject the president's request for fast-track authority when bringing the TPP to Congress for approval. And we want to applaud that action by the commission because we really strongly believe that giving Congress a limited time to debate a document that hasn't even been made public, there hasn't been a chance to have public discourse over what's actually in it. And
these agreements have been devastating to Maine's paper and forest products industry. U.S. Department of Labor statistics show that over 2,000 jobs were lost in this sector from 1997 to 2003. I know the loss goes beyond that because the list does not include Moosehead Furniture of Greenville, Forrester Manufacturing of Wilton, and Newton Hardwoods of Madison. The effects on local communities have been devastating as well. One of the countries included in the TTP is Vietnam. At this time, Vietnam has over 250,000 forest products workers and more than 2,000 wood processing plants in operation. They are the second largest manufacturer of furniture on the U.S. market. There is a possibility that if Maine is not involved in this agreement, that it could be the end of the forest products industry. Vietnam imports about 70% of their raw wood. It would be too bad to see Maine become only a raw wood supplier instead of keeping these value-added jobs in the state by processing raw wood into products right here at home.
In addition to bypassing local control and having such limited accessibility to Maine companies, the picture of what the East-West corridor could bring to Maine is depressing. Industrial wind developments, increased dumping of out-of-state waste, water mining, wood extraction, especially torrefied wood pellets, which are currently highly desirable in Europe, gravel, also in high demand in Europe, and mineral mining by transnational corporations who are not invested in Maine's long-term health and viability to support life here. Bolstered by protections provided by the international trade laws, would be a very bleak future. In conclusion, to repeat myself, the impact of these new free trade agreements would be crushing. The impact of the East-West corridor alone with the already existing free trade law would be crushing, but the combined impact of the East-West corridor, the TPP, the TTIP would be game over for life-affirming existence in Maine. So please do your best to recommend that fast track does not happen and that these trade agreements do not happen within your power. Thank you very much for your time.